Not everyone who's concerned about Palestine is necessarily focused on AUKUS. And not everyone who's concerned about AUKUS and nuclear submarines and nuclear reactors here in Cockburn Sound thinks about Palestine. But today, International Day of Peace, is precisely the day to connect the two issues, because they are fundamentally connected, both politically and operationally. We see that in the way that Australia is part of the F-35 weapons supply part chain. We see it in the way that the weapons that we buy are road tested by Israel on the Palestinians and are sold on that basis. We see it in the way that intelligence is almost certainly shared from both Pine Gap and Kojarina by the United States with Israel. And we have to understand the two things are linked precisely because, firstly, Israel represents an outpost, a garrison state, an aircraft carrier for the United States in the Middle East that can be used like a sledgehammer to smash any regime, any government, any popular force, any force whatsoever that opposes US strategic and corporate interests. And on the other, AUKUS means further embedding unconditionally Australia with US military policy. So it's not like a buffet dinner where Australia can say, well, we'd like 2 serves of nuclear submarines, but we'll pass on the genocide in Palestine. It doesn't work that way. The United States is giving us a set menu. Now, the submarines themselves may never arrive, the AUKUS-class submarines, but for the United States, it's not that important. Kurt Campbell, Secretary of State, said that if Australia does get that nuclear submarine technology, that the United States expects and would not give that technology unless Australian submarines were mobilised to join the United States when the United States chooses to go to war. If the AUKUS-class submarines never arrive, the United States will just station its Virginia-class submarines down at Cockburn Sound. That's the important thing, that the AUKUS itself, it might be the flagship, but it's framed by the Force Posture Agreement, which was signed some years ago. And that already envisages the closer integration of Australian military forces with the United States. In particular, it allows for the United States to position and have full authority over designated areas in Australia. It's also coupled with AUKUS Pillar 2. And that means more defence cooperation with the United States on all sorts of areas, from AI to drones and so on. We have to break AUKUS if we want to see peace and justice in the region and peace and justice in Palestine. Now, some of us might have hoped that with the election of the hideous Donald Trump, that Australia might actually start to take some distance from the US, both on the question of Palestine and on the question of AUKUS. But in fact, the very opposite is true. Only a couple of weeks ago, Defence Minister Richard Marles went over to meet with Peg Hegseth, where he committed to increase Australia's military expenditure as demanded by Donald Trump. Now, I don't know exactly how the conversation went, but I think it was something like this. We know we've pissed you off by saying we'll recognise Palestine, but we've got to throw some crumbs to the Australian public to appease public opinion. But look, we've just broken diplomatic ties with Iran, and here's another $800 million of Australian taxpayers' money with no conditions attached as a donation to the US shipbuilding industry. Please keep us on board. Now, when I say that, look, I'm not saying the conversation went exactly like that, but that's the gist of it. That's the meaning of the interchange. Now, when I say that, that doesn't mean to say that the federal government's declaration that it will recognise Palestine has no value to us whatsoever. It does have some symbolic value. It does indicate the fact that the federal government is under pressure, that Australian public opinion is starting to shift, that people want to see action on Palestine. So it's not just symbolism and just words. But right now, what we need are sanctions, because people are being killed right now. What we need is action right now. And when politicians like Albanese and Starmer and Macron declare their support for recognition of Palestine, let's be very clear what they're trying to do. Their agenda isn't saving Palestinian lives. No, their agenda is trying to find a way to save public support for Israel within Western public opinion. They're trying to say to Trump, look, this is starting to really hurt us. You've got to dial it back a little bit. Of course, the problem they have is that Trump's not listening and Netanyahu's not listening, because that's not the voter base that Trump's appealing to. He's appealing to the people that the Liberals appeal to here, or that Reform is appealing to in the UK. The people who don't care about Palestinian lives. The people who just regard the Israelis as the civilised Westerners and the Palestinians as the people of the global south, the brown-skinned barbarians. And no facts or figures or reference to international law is going to change that point of view. So that's the dilemma that Anthony Albanese has. How to pretend to be the good guy while still fundamentally, on the guts of the issue, supporting Israel. That's his dilemma. But it's not our dilemma. It's a dilemma that it's a contradiction that we need to sharpen, and sharpen really hard. And in connection with this, I want to mention the fact that there have been some Labor politicians who've lamented the carnage in Gaza, or who oppose nuclear submarines. And it's not for me to say that that sentiment is not genuine. Although I will say this, I don't think any of the Labor politicians have called what is happening in Gaza a genocide as such, and none of them have called out the fact that the Australian government, through bilateral military ties, materially aids and abets the genocide. But even if they did, that's not the point. That's not the most important thing. Because I'm calling out the genocide. You're calling out the genocide. We're all calling out the genocide. But if you're a member of Parliament, you get to do something else. You get to vote on the floor of Parliament. That's the judge. That's the measure of the efficacy and sincerity of your actions. So when are we going to see a private member's bill introduced on the floor of Parliament, either by our member for Fremantle or any of the other Labor MPs who profess concern? Now, when the Greens did it, the Labor Party said, oh, that's just a stunt. Okay, it's a stunt. Okay, well then, why don't they do it? Introduce it as a private member's bill. We don't care who gets the glory of introducing the damn thing to the floor of Parliament. We want it put. Cancel all military ties with Israel. It has to happen now. That is the single most effective thing Australia could do to make a difference. We can do all the other stuff, but it has to start with that. If you're fair income, that's the dividing line about whether you're fair income or not. And we need to be absolutely laser sharp on that demand. Cancel AUKUS. Cut military ties with Israel. Not soon, not tomorrow, now. And we're going to have to build a movement to do it. Because Israel is just so fundamental to US strategy, that's why our government is so resistant to taking real action. That's why even other Western governments, like Spain or Ireland or Slovakia, have done more than Australia. But by being enmeshed in this AUKUS dynamic, it's made it really hard for them. It's made it hard for us too. And so that's why we need to build a movement like we've never built before around Palestine. What we've done so far is amazing. We've never seen it before in this country. But you need to think on terms of the anti-apartheid movement or the anti-Vietnam War movement. And you're going to have to speak to friends and colleagues who've been to one demonstration of 30,000 people and think, oh, that's fantastic. The government's going to listen now. No, it's going to take a lot more than that. It's going to need many, many mobilisations like that and an absolute flourishing of activity in between. It doesn't just need to be big, it needs to intensify. That's the challenge we all have if we want to build peace in our region and peace in Palestine. Thank you.